Hi, my name is John Aster. I'm from Australia, and you're probably wondering, if you're a magistrate and you're reviewing this at the moment, why someone in Australia is actually speaking with you and giving evidence. The reason is because psychiatrists are the same all over the world. When a psychiatrist who has been working and recommended by magistrates for 20 years can suggest to go out and buy a gun and shoot yourself, well, the thing is it is time to actually overhaul and have a look why it is necessary to go and see a psychiatrist. A doctor is the only person who can actually make that recommendation. You are not a medical practitioner, and in some countries you can be sued for making a medical observation when you have no degree in that field. I would like to go on now and show you why, and giving proofs of claim, why you should actually send someone to a psychiatrist. When there is legal abuse or legal bullying in a family court, there is someone who's squeaking. Usually there's a saying globally, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. These days in family law, it seems from communicating with people all over the world, is the squeaky person gets the psychiatrist. And the reason is because family lawyers do not wish to deal with criminal law. And I've already proved that with my own case, that family courts do not deal with criminal activity, and nor do police, and nor do anyone else. So the thing is they are relying, and they are in trust to a former trust with the family law court to actually provide justice. And the thing is if justice is not served, then it's not a case of sending that person to a psychiatrist. I'm going to prove to you now that psychiatrists are no more than witch doctors, and basically everything that is suggested by them is basically brings fraud on the court even more. Family courts are very fond of using the same psychiatrists who seem to be doing dirty deeds, who write on affidavits suggesting that a person needs to seek medical treatment for such claims of illnesses that there is no scientific or pathology results which could prove that they do exist. The person standing before you has probably written something similar to what is on this screen. I conditionally accept what you say to the following proof of claim. Proof of claim that there has been any case of a psychological patient being cured according to this global organization of psychiatrists, and I would like to refer you to this video that clarifies none exist. Proof of claim that the psychiatrists have not raised fraud by raising such a recommendation for proposed treatment when having full knowledge none exists to pervert the course of justice. I do not intend to participate in a myth or a treatment that does not exist, and having a psychiatrist bringing fraud on this court by suggesting such disease is curable without proofs. My best guess is someone is reviewing this. Usually a psychiatrist is involved in a case where a person is complaining about legal abuse, legal bullying, or a person not following the law. If a magistrate is happy to commit fraud by ignoring and finding some sort of alternative reason other than to judge law, then this is conspiracy to commit fraud. And if there is a refusal to allow investigations, it is when there is claims of fraud on the court. Every free man is entitled to a fair and speedy trial. The underlying assumption is that people have this particular disease, as psychiatrists see it, are really suffering from a brain disorder or a chemical imbalance or something of a physical genetical defect, which is merely a claim. These have never been scientifically proven to substantiate this claim. Pathology have never in their textbooks ever written of such a physical component or mental illness. The whole society has been indoctrinated to believe that there is such diseases They don't have a scientific valid approach for solving them. Please review this proof of claim by watching this video.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to receive this award tonight, named for my dear friend and colleague, Thomas Szasz. As Thomas Szasz wrote years ago, the only true political virtue is obedience to authority, and the only true political sin is independence. Independence renders authority useless, and that is what infuriates it so. You've undoubtedly been told you're mentally ill for daring to say that the emperor called psychiatry has no clothes, not to mention stupid and unscientific. At least this is what some of my colleagues say about me at one university. So if this is something that has happened to you, I'm here to say that you are not alone. The controversy regarding the myth of mental illness and psychiatry is not about science or medicine, it's about power. When psychiatrists start agreeing with you, well then perhaps you ought to reconsider your position. Something may be wrong. So I'd like to say a few disobedient things, which is especially true because I was trained as a psychologist, and when a member of the profession criticizes its own, it's considered especially sacrilegious. What do we know that is true, that the cult of psychiatry keeps telling us is false? First, the idea that there is a known brain lesion causing mental illness. The truth is, we cannot tell who is mentally ill and who is not by looking at pictures of their brains or analyzing their blood. Psychiatrists had to invent their own book of diseases because pathologists would have nothing to do with them. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM, a great work of fiction. What's the difference? What's the difference between the DSM and a scientific book of disease? Every disorder in the DSM is invented. Every disease listed in a pathology textbook is discovered. Real disease is found in a cadaver at autopsy. Mental illness is not. Mental illness refers to something that a person does. Real disease refers to something that a person has. Consider this yet another way. It takes one person to have a real disease. It takes two people to have a mental illness. If you're alone on an island, you could develop a real disease like cancer or heart disease, but you cannot develop a mental illness such as hyperactivity or schizophrenia. This is because mental illness is always diagnosed on the basis of some sort of social conflict. When people do something that others find objectionable, they can be diagnosed as mentally ill. If the person doing the diagnosing is more powerful than the person diagnosed, then there is trouble. In this sense, the diagnosis of mental illness is always a weapon. Not so when it comes to diagnosing real disease. Think of how, when people get angry with one another, they inevitably resort to some kind of diagnosis. They say, "You're crazy. You're mentally ill. You're paranoid." Can you imagine somebody getting angry with someone and saying, "You have diabetes. You have Parkinson's disease"? Social conflict has nothing to do with developing a real disease. You don't develop diabetes because someone doesn't like the way you think, speak, or behave. You have to have someone else present to judge that your behavior is morally good or bad in order to have a mental illness. So diagnosis is a weapon, a tool people use against one another, especially when there is some kind of power conflict present. And what of treatment? Treatment for mental illness is punishment. Look at our criminal justice system. When someone commits a crime and a psychiatrist is in the courtroom, a defendant may go to a mental institution instead of a prison. Can you imagine a judge saying, "I sentence you to treatment for your cancer"? I submit to you that psychiatric treatment is worse than prison. For in prison, they don't judge how long people should be deprived of liberty on the basis of what they think about themselves and the world. In a mental institution, of course, this is the case. If you don't think about yourself and the world correctly, you'll be punished longer. Psychiatrists love to say that mental illness is a real disease, just like cancer. The analogy between mental illness and real disease is not reciprocal. It doesn't hold both ways. Having cancer is not like being depressed. We don't shock people who have cancer to make them better, especially if they don't want to be shocked. Consider how melanoma, a deadly form of skin cancer, is a disease here as well as in northern India. If you have melanoma, does it cease to exist if you move to another country, another culture? Of course not. If you're wandering the foothills of the Himalayas and meditating for 15 hours a day, you may very well be called a holy man in India. Take that same person, have him walk across the grounds of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., and he's diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic and committed to a mental hospital. What do you think psychiatrists would do if Jesus were alive today, or Buddha, or Mohammed? Bada bing, right into a mental hospital, injected with drugs to stop their crazy beliefs and speech. Psychiatrists today are the true grand inquisitors. They would crucify the holy men and women of yesterday in an instant. My father was sent from Nazi Germany to America in 1933 when he was about 15 years old. From the time he was sent out of Germany by his family because he was a Jew until his dying day 5 years ago, he had nightmares that the Nazis were persecuting him. He fought against them his whole life, awake and asleep. I used to ask him, "Dad, what were people thinking in Germany back then? What were they thinking when they saw the Nazis parading about?" And he used to say, "Nobody took them seriously. Nobody believed they could ever have the power to do what they did. We laughed at them." Now, while I encourage you to laugh in the face of those psychiatrists who argue that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, know too that we must also take them seriously, especially when it comes to the harm they have done to people in the name of helping them. For if we do not, history will repeat itself. We are building a resistance to the psychiatric Gestapo. The Citizens Commission on Human Rights is an important partner in the fight for liberty and justice. That is why we are here tonight, and that is why we will be together tomorrow. Thank you.
The family law cases are based on the interests of a child, so please consider this. Children who are denied regular contact with one of their parents makes up 63% of all youth suicides, 70% of all juveniles in state institutions, 71% of all high school dropouts, 75% of all drug abuse centres, 85% of all children diagnosed with behavioural problems, 80% of all the juvenile offenders, and 90% of all homeless and runaway children. They are 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 32 times more likely to run away, 20 times more likely to have behavioural disorders, 14 times more likely to commit rape, 9 times more likely to end up in state-operated institutions, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. 85% of all abuse victims are from single-parent homes.